Alex Santibas from Mesoamerica's again. Welcome to another episode of Automation 101. And today we're very excited. We have our first international guest all the way from across the pond, so to speak. We have Dan all the way in Manchester in the UK. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Alex. Really looking forward to having this chat.
So, Dan, I've got a set of questions I always ask, but I think the first question I'm going to ask you, are you a blue or are you a red?
That is a great question. Actually, I was born in Liverpool, so I could choose the blue or the red team from Liverpool. I could also choose the blue or the red team here from Manchester. But I think in order to avoid any kind of controversy, I will keep quiet on that one.
I will state I'm a big Liverpool fan. Yeah, so I'm definitely on the red from Merseyside. So, okay, we'll go with that then, no worries. And apologies to our US viewers who don't understand what we're talking about. But anyway, let's get started then. So one of the first questions I always ask is about how to define lab automation. So in my experience and conversations with other people also in this industry, not just with customers, so to speak, when you say and you mention the words lab automation, people have this very unrealistic, I would say, picture about it. So how do you define it then to paint a more accurate and more realistic picture?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really broad topic when you think about lab automation, and it can cover so many different things. But essentially, it's technology that helps you as a scientist to either free up more time to get more stuff done, or to do things better or in a way that just wouldn't be possible by hand. So, that can be things like being more precise, more reproducible, having less errors. My area is liquid handling, and excuse me, no scientist that I've ever spoken to has ever said that they got into science because they love pipetting. It just it just doesn't happen, and some people still have a fear of kind of automating, and some of that fear is justified. But I think about it in this way: automation and lab automation is all around us anyway. As a scientist, when was the last time that you sort of took a PCR tube and manually transferred that between different water baths to get your PCR reaction to take place? You would never think about doing a manual PCR. It's just automated. So the cutting edge things of today kind of become the run of the mill things for tomorrow. So that's just sort of the way that I would kind of present lab automation, maybe to somebody that was a little bit skeptic or didn't really have a clear idea of what it is. It's something that's there to really help you out and save you time, allow you to do better things than pipetting by hand or moving tubes between water baths.
And it's quite interesting because when you add the word lab to it, I think that's what tends to scare people. Because if we just think, just generally, I mean, I can't live without my iPhone, for example. I go to Starbucks, I order my coffee beforehand, and that's all, these are all automated solutions, so to speak. So we do it every single day in our private life, so to speak. But you add the word, I think, lab to it, and suddenly there's a little bit of fear to a certain extent for some people.
Yeah, completely. And some of that fear is justified. But I think when you start to help people break it down and really understand that it doesn't have to be these huge, great big multi-million-dollar systems. It can be really small incremental steps to help your lab improve and to do things better. Then it really starts to make sense for people.
Okay, so taking your definition then of lab automation, I think so far what I've seen, at least, there are two key barriers to implementing a solution. Those two being cost and complexity. Those are the two that come up most of the time in my conversations. I think there is possibly also a third one, which I call complacency, in that people just get very stuck into their ways. I say many times that we are, creatures of habit. So we just get used to what we're doing.
Yeah.
So to that end, imagine now we have let's say, small to medium-sized lab. They're not big. They don't have the budgets of the big boys or anything like that. But, they're relatively profitable. They're doing what they're doing. They're doing it relatively well. They've got their manual processes down to a T, and that's what they're doing. Sort of, we're okay. We're happy. how do you now, or us as an industry, let's say, how do we convince labs like that, which I think there's a lot more like that, to be honest, than the ones who are open and embracing automation. How do you get those guys now to say, wait a second, I really need an automated solution, not necessarily the entire lab, maybe just a particular workflow and so forth, but how do we convince them otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really enviable position, I think, to be in, for somebody to be so, so happy and comfortable and not need to worry about anything at all in the world. So, science is really about pushing boundaries. So, looking for the next discovery, going beyond, what you can imagine today. But scientists themselves, like you said, are often very kind of cautious about change and about bringing something new in. And there's often this kind of attitude of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. In a lab, bringing change in, at best, it can be a lot of paperwork. At worst, it can really sort of disrupt and break these, the established protocols that have been put in place and create a lot of hard work and a lot of headaches. So what I would say to these people is, don't really think about where you are now. Where you are now is in a good place, but you can't stand still and think about where you want to be in the future. So, whether it's 6 months down the line or in a few years, really, try to sort of envision what what you want to be able to do in the lab, what you want to be achieving, and think about maybe some of the things that might come up in the future. So maybe that you've got some fantastic staff here right now who are very good at what they're doing, but what if they're sort of coming up to retirement age, or what if they get poached by another company? So how are you going to deal with those things that come through? And automation can very often sort of help to so automation can kind of bring the benefits there to sort of help insulate against some of those unforeseen things that can come up, those bumps in the road as you're going along. And another thing that I would say is, again, it doesn't have to be these huge, great big systems with loads of different components and parts that are all interacting and talking to each other. Those systems are very cool, but you can start very, very small and test and build up that capability in a very accessible kind of way.
Yeah. Your key phrase that you said there was, you can't stand still.
Yes.
And that's true. I mean, I think sometimes we forget, labs are also businesses. Yeah. And okay, sure, we talk about, innovation and so on and so forth, but you're also a business. And if you're not going with the times, you're not advancing and making progress, you're going to be overtaken at some point. And the reality is maybe you don't exist very long as a result.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true. And when you think about the systems that are being put in place, and again, sort of going back to these big integrated systems, which really do have a place in some labs. I was talking to a user, a customer of ours, a little while ago, who had a really state-of-the-art piece of equipment. It was lots of different components that were all talking to each other, but they were lamenting that because they just weren't able to use it to the best of its capabilities. And really, if they, when they took a step back from it, what they would have chosen to do in a different situation is to actually have something that was a lot more flexible and modular, so that they could really take advantage of all of the different individual components in that big system. So even in our hypothetical perfect lab that we're talking to, the question that I'd ask is, what's one headache that you've got right now that if you could solve it, what would that be? And even in the most perfect lab, I'm sure there would be one or two things where we could sort of say, right, let's dig in a little bit deeper and see if there's a solution there that can be beneficial for you.
Sure, I'm sure you find that pain point, so to speak.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing as well is that, again, scientists there's this fantastic community out there, and scientists are often talking about the discoveries that they're making and things like that. When you then think about the labs that those scientists are working in, they can be quite insular and quite self-contained. So another piece of advice I would give is to go out there and actually talk to people. There are forums online, so you don't even have to leave the house. You can have great conversations. But go to conferences like SLAS over in the US, LRIG here in the UK. Talk to the vendors who will be able to sort of let you know what the latest and greatest things are from them, but also go and listen to the talks, because there's peers of yours who've implemented these solutions, and they'll talk about their successes in their presentations. And then when you get to the beers in the networking event in the evening, go and catch them and find out about all of the failures that happened on the route to that success, so you don't have to sort of repeat those.
Yeah, that's a great point, to network. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so do you think, Dan, I mean, based on everything that you've said, clearly obviously you're a big fan of lab automation, but do you think, and it goes without saying, I suppose, but do you think there's ever a chance where some labs can become too dependent on automation?
That's a really good question. And one of the things that I think needs to be really clear for anybody who's kind of working in science and in this industry is there has to be a level of understanding of how you get to your results or your data. So, we're at a level now for a lot of different processes where you can take your sample, put that into a black box, press a button, and get your results out at the other end. And that can be fantastic, but there also really needs to be an understanding of how you get to those results. And I think it's important that we build the foundation sort of on the education side of things. So knowing those processes of how we get to those results, whether it's basic pipetting skills or how PCR actually works, having had to do the moving the tubes between the water baths to really understand that. And I think educators as well can really empower how their students can be best equipped for the lab of the future, or even the lab of today, rather than the labs of 20 years ago, which is perhaps sort of what is being taught in the colleges and universities at the moment. So a really nice example of that is a lab in Uppsala, the university in Uppsala in Sweden, who are running a course now specifically for lab automation. So the students there can actually take part in this course over the course of a few weeks and really understand how different pieces of lab automation work. So one of the pieces in there is the Flowbot, together with some microscopy, together with a robotic arm and some scheduling software, and understand the nuts and bolts of how all of these things work, which then they can take into industry or into their further academic careers, and really help to sort of push things forwards there.
That's pretty amazing. I think that's probably the only course that I'm aware of actually that is linked to lab automation then.
As far as I know, it is. Yeah, it's really exciting that they've got it there in Sweden, and we're really honoured that they've chosen the Flowbot as part of the setup there as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really good. So, final question then, Dan. I don't have many years of experience in this industry. I've come from the outside, and what perplexed me, I guess, in the beginning, or even till this day, in all honesty, is that there's not a lot of conversation, and perhaps I can understand why to an extent, but there's not a lot of conversation about return on investment. And as I said earlier, I mean, fundamentally, I understand, with science and scientists and so forth, everyone likes to talk about innovation, the next big thing, and all the tests and whatnot, and health, and absolutely 100% get all of that. But fundamentally, also, it is a business unit, so to speak. They still have to turn a profit. I don't know many labs that could say I don't worry about the finances or anything like that, and I'll be fine, not to worry. They have somebody at least in the lab is worrying about that to an extent. So somebody has to think about the question of, okay, I sat here with Dan. He told me about the Flowbots. Great, everything's wonderful. We're going to go ahead. How do you now help them sort of measure the return on investment?
That's a really good question, and I think it's something that that again, maybe a lot of people who are looking at specific pieces of equipment in the lab maybe don't necessarily think about until they have to put together a business case to get the money to actually buy the equipment, and then all of a sudden they have to sort of think about these sorts of things. So again, I think it's really good to sort of have those conversations quite early on. And when you're thinking about that investment, it's also a good idea to kind of factor in a lot of different things as well. So don't necessarily just focus on the big capital expenditure, but think about the costs of things like the time of how long it's going to take to get people to trained up on that equipment, how long it's going to take to actually get that implemented and get it productive. And build all of that into your return on investment kind of calculations. Then for some labs, it's fairly straightforward. You know, their customers are paying them for results. So the more results that they can put through their lab, the sooner they can get that return on investment. So it's quite simple to sort of do that calculation. For other labs, it can be a little bit more hard, and you have to think about some of the other less tangible benefits of bringing the automation into the lab. So, you know, it could be something as specific as, you know, how many hours of time is lost through to RSI from pipetting. So if you have a calculation from that, you can then sort of say, you know, we lost over the course of the last year 100 hours worth of staff time that had a specific dollar value on it. So by implementing this particular piece of lab automation, we can recoup those losses. So that's putting a very sort of specific dollar value onto that. But what it doesn't take into account is actually, you know what, the staff in our lab are a lot happier now. They're not having to do this, and they're not having to take that time off. And you know, that's something that it's very difficult to kind of put that dollar value on. So calculating that return on investment, it's important because that's how you're going to get that approval to spend the money on the equipment that you know is going to be an improvement for your lab. But putting together a business case really often has to be a combination of those really tangible dollar values together with sort of the softer benefits that a piece of automation can bring in, like, you know, happier staff, being able to go and have those really creative conversations with people at conferences where you're not sort of tied to the bench having to do pipetting or transferring plates, you know, delivering plates from an incubator to a plate reader. So really taking both of those factors into account.
No, that's fair enough. And I think perhaps the softer side, as you said, I think that's just over time you can start to measure that. So, you know, you have less people leaving, for example, maybe your productivity improves and so forth. But like you said, you can't measure that maybe immediately, but look over the course of a year and say, oh, okay, you know, our the exit rate, so to speak, that dropped from, you know, I don't know, 20%, that's down to 5% only now. Okay, so we're retaining more of our staff now and so forth. So yeah, these are all great points. And I think also to be able to do the return on investment beforehand, to know, because there's a lot of choices out there, in fairness, but it's got to be the right equipment, not necessarily one that's got maybe the best price tag, so to speak, or all these other points that you laid out, because, you know, how easy is it to use? You know, how much training is involved? Can I just literally just plug it in within an hour, press play, and thank you very much, everybody knows how to use it, and off we go?
Yeah.
All those points are important.
Yeah, and you know, I think a lot of time people don't really always take that into account, and even things like the sort of ongoing costs for a piece of equipment as well. So you think about that initial capital investment, but then how much is it going to cost over the lifetime of that equipment for things like the service and the support, for the consumables that a piece of equipment uses, and for say, for example, if you need to have application support, you know, how much is that going to cost for a piece of equipment? So again, it can get very, very detailed, and you can sort of really dig into a lot of figures there. But at the end of the day, I think putting together a really compelling business case, if you're working in a laboratory, if you're a lab manager and you know that this piece of equipment is going to be valuable for you, it's being able to really tell that story to whoever's going to sign off on the budget. And part of that is, these are my figures, this is my spreadsheet, this is where we're going to have the return on investment on this piece of equipment, but also this is the other real benefits that this is going to bring into our lab.
Right. Well, Dan, honestly, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.
It's really good to have you.
It's been great chatting to you. I look forward to speaking again soon.